each phase, each pathologic aspect of the disease has to have its own specific treatment, how those treatments are derived from the biologic mechanisms of the disease. Thus, I was frankly astounded that the studies of hospital treatments were being represented as applying to outpatients, in violation of what I had learned in how to treat patients in medical school. We're now finally coming to address why over the last 6 months, our government research institutions have invested billions of dollars in expensive patent medications and vaccine development, but almost nothing in early outpatient treatments, the first line of response to this pandemic. And it's not that we've lacked candidate medications to study, we've had a number of promising agents. But I think that the early on conflation of hospital with outpatient disease served to imply that treatment of outpatient disease had been studied and found ineffective. This illogical premise motivated me to look at what actually the evidence for outpatient disease and its treatment were. So I want to reiterate that we are considering the evidence for early treatment of high-risk outpatients to prevent hospitalization and mortality. And that's it. I'm not talking about inpatient disease. That's a totally different consideration. I'm talking only about outpatient disease. So this is treatment starting in the first 5 days or so after the onset of symptoms. Treatment of older patients or patients with chronic conditions like diabetes or obesity, heart diseases, lung diseases, kidney diseases, immune system diseases, survivors from cancer, and so on. These are the people who are most likely to die from COVID, and they are the people most in need of protection. So in doing my research, I sought to obtain reports of every study of every medication pertaining to early treatment of high-risk outpatients. I monitor the literature daily, which is a task. And what I have found is actually remarkable. What I've observed is that while there have been positive reports of a number of drugs, every study of the outpatient use of one particular drug, hydroxychloroquine, with or without accompanying agents, has shown substantial benefit in reducing risks of hospitalization and mortality. Now, these studies break down into two major types. The first is the double-blinded, randomized controlled trials that various government and scientific personalities say provide the strongest, supposedly the only trustworthy form of evidence. The second is non-randomized but still controlled trials. There's some truth in that assertion about the nature of the quality of the evidence, but there's also much falsehood. We know, for example, that the great majority of drugs used to treat heart diseases were established before randomized controlled trials, with non-randomized trials. Cholesterol-lowering drugs were in widespread use before randomized trials were ever done. Azithromycin, which is the most common antibiotic used in children, was not established by randomized controlled trials. The great majority of drugs that are in use today were not established when they went into widespread use with randomized trials. Many of them had randomized trials later, but the establishment and use of drugs is not always done on the basis of randomized trials, but on the study with other kinds of studies.